Okay, good afternoon to Dr. Saiful. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to submit my presentation. I know it's been very late, so without further ado, let me present my final assignment. As you can see to the screen here, module M002, Communication Management, Adapting Communication During a Pandemic, by me. So on the following page here, we have the instructions for the assignment, and then let's see the first question. Identify an organization that I have access to and discuss how the situation is perceived. I am to include a non-linear explanation in my discussion. Okay, so for the person that I chose to interview someone in the financial sector because I think it's very relevant to the topic of COVID-19 that we have right now, especially when it concerns to communications between the government and its people. So the person who I have chose to interview is my sister. She is currently holding the position of ABP TTS Market Manager in Citibank Malaysia. And I've already written a brief overview on what she does. But to put it simply, in Citibank, there are 6 major operations that they do, which includes payments, collections, liquidity management, trade, cards, and foreign exchange. And my sister, when she entered into Citibank, she entered into the department of balance of payments, which means she was as an ABP also, but in a different department that she is currently in now. So in balance of payments department, basically she works in operations and she makes sure that the cash flow of Citibank Malaysia and its other regional hubs and its clients, the money is basically keep moving lah. And then sometime last year, she was promoted to another department. I wouldn't say promoted a department, I just moved on to a different department where she is now a market manager for the for the department that is in charge of ensuring that Citibank's operation in Malaysia is in compliance with Bank Negara Malaysia's guideline and policies. So basically the department where it makes sure there's no funny business, no black market dealing is going on. I mean, it's not like they have any power to do anything about it, but Bank Negara Malaysia has set up a system whereby banks that operate in Malaysia have to report their activities to them, so they can have that's where when we get the annual report for economic terms. I forgot what's the name for it for Malaysia, the economic plan, where Bank Negara get its information is basically from banks and from people like my sister who works as a TTS market manager. So naturally her job requires constant communication with Bank Negara Malaysia, that's one thing, and also with all the overseas partners and the regional hubs of Citibank in around the world, because Citibank in general is not really a consumer facing banking. They are more focused into corporates, so it's a big ticket item lah. Okay, anyways, that's going too much about her already. Let me just go into the fact of the matter of the question. So the first question is how in their view COVID-19 pandemic has changed in Malaysia. So I've interviewed, and then for the part A there's going to be quite a lot of text because it's mostly the findings I get when I'm interviewing my sister. So for the first one is let me zoom in, is acceleration of digitalization process. So Citibank has always been in the forefront of like technology when it comes to like financial products or financial services. So beforehand they already have a big push to do everything digitally, and then more so in COVID-19, so there's more investment put into this area. As we can see, businesses are some excerpts of what my sister have said in our interview. Businesses are forced to go digital. Citibank agenda has always been about digitalization, so this in a way helps our agenda. But because of the COVID-19, we cannot deny the fact that cross-border businesses have contracted by 30%. Okay, then the major thing in the short term is also from the work from home model. This model is not foreign to Citibank. They have definitely done it in before, but then because of the pandemic they are doing it in a much larger scale. So by end of this year, the Citibank Malaysia has mandated that as a permanent strategy, 50% of the workforce will be working from home and 50% from the office, and some parts of it will be in a rotating kind of situation here. So due to this, office spaces are expected to be reduced considerably, and then reducing their real estate costs in Malaysia by quite a margin. But this cost saving doesn't necessarily mean job security for the employees, because it's also giving, as she said in the second excerpt, it's easier to outsource to India for cheaper and cost efficiencies. Typically, that means they are moving more of their activities out overseas, and especially India, because it's much cheaper labor force. Before COVID-19, BM don't allow outsourcing to overseas for core banking operations, but because of the nature of the COVID-19 and because Malaysia, from what I understand, Bank Negara doesn't want like the banks to basically go kaput in Malaysia, so they allow some core banking operations to be outsourced, so that there's some operations at least happening in Malaysia. So these cost-cutting measures in some ways will affect recruiting efforts in the following years quite drastically. And then that's the short term. In the long term, what long term basically these are the long term concerns of and before that, in the work from home model, also to okay, sorry, never mind, I just continue. So in the long term, number one, what their major concern is the second lockdown, because cease of operation is going to affect them drastically, and the coming and having a robust business continuity plan. So one of the excerpts: when and how do we implement contingency plans? If second lockdown is announced next week, next month, and for how long? Will our plans be able to scale for however long it lasts? So second, at this point, second lockdown is most likely going to happen. As of July 26th, the government announced that second lockdown will be imposed if new cases hit more than 100 a day. So Citibank, whatever the case, they don't care. All they care is about continued service. So they really need to prepare for the eventual second lockdown. And then also in the long term, they have already updated their SOP in response to COVID-19. So this comes back to our topic of our discussion is within communications. How do the higher ups communicate with their staff when half of them are working from home? So one of the SOP changes that my sister mentioned is that the CEO videos himself and sends us his weekly regards. Top management is asked to constantly have video calls with employees working from home to stay connected. In addition to that, to make sure that the transition for the employees that will work from home easier, Citi also have provided allowances for their staff to set up their own home offices should they need to adopt the work from home model for an extended period. And this allowance is really quite generous. If I'm not mistaken, it's between 6,000 to 8,000 just to set up your own office in your home. So this is key. The reason why Citibank doesn't mind giving out this much money for the workers to set up their own office is that they understand that many people get satisfaction from their work when they receive feedback from the people around them. And then if you work from home, most likely you're going to be very siloed off, and you may not get enough satisfaction, and then they worry your productivity might go low, or you can't really have a good teamwork. So the most important thing for them is that making sure that the environment at home is as close as possible and as pain-free as possible when compared to working at home, because as we know, everyone has different circumstances, right? So then question number 2 is the organisation view on the press conferences on COVID-19 issue. So I provided the PDF link. You may read some excerpts from a news article that the managing director of consumer banking in Citi has made about concerning the COVID-19. One thing I want to point out here is that the last sentence which she said, we ensure that banking experiences are digitally led but backed by people. So I'm pretty sure other banks also feel the same, that no matter what, our clients are the most important and we must continue operations. So that's the mindset for all banks basically, right? So in summary, what exactly do the banks, or in this case Citibank, really think about the COVID-19 is that in Citibank in particular, they have a long track record of adopting best practices for disaster contingency for all of their regional operations. So the current climate is no different to that. One famous example that my sister used to say is that during the terrorist attack at the World Trade Center at 9/11, when that happened, the Citibank's headquarters in New York was the first bank in all of United States that continued their banking operations like within one afternoon only. I mean, not one, a few hours only. Basically, their how they were able to achieve that was because, like, in all their regions, in all of their headquarters, they actually, besides their headquarters, they actually have a secondary base location which is usually a warehouse, a gigantic warehouse which city has rented out and then has already installed all of their infrastructure that they would need to continue, like, the internet, all their systems. So when the planes crashed into the World Trade Center, the employees simply just packed up their stuff and then just took the train and go to a second base in New Jersey and continued our operations, and then they were the first bank to continue operations without problems. So when it comes to press conferences, what in their point of view is that press conferences are the public interface of the government's actions and policies, but that's not the main way how Citi communicates with the government itself, because the main channel would definitely be Bank Negara Malaysia, which by in practice the banks would definitely have been briefed and would have been consulted with regarding the government's plans before the government even put up their press conference. So Citibank pretty much knows what's going to happen before they even the government presents in the press conference. So that's my part A concerning the people I have access to. And then looking back to the second question, it says identify a good example of government communication methodology other than Malaysia in handling the pandemic. Discuss these items. So interestingly, for this part, I've taken an unorthodox view, I would say, because the question merely only said to do an example of another government's methodology regarding a pandemic. It did not specify which pandemic and when. So my example that I'm going to choose is Malaysia current in 2020 and the 2009 H1N1 pandemic when Obama was the president of the United States. Okay, so for this part, let me take you back to the climate of 2000. Basically, I'm just giving an overview between 2009 and 2020. So and then in particular, let me see. In particular, with regards to government's communication, I'm referring to each of these governments, Malaysia and the United States, with the press briefing. The first press briefing regarding each of these pandemic. So I provided the links to the video of the first press briefing whereby each of these leaders talked about the pandemic of that time. So you may pause the video, watch the video, and then come back, and then so I'll be over here, so I'll be waiting, so I'll just wait for a while. Okay, hi, welcome back. So if you chose not to watch the video, then let me just you can choose to watch the video or not, because I provided the PDF with their transcripts, so you may review that their speech in that way. But let me just give a brief overview of the climate in 2009 and 2020. So in 2009, one of the most trending news hashtag in Twitter at that time was the swine flu, as we all recall. The biggest news in 2009 was that yes, Barack Obama was becoming the first African American president of the United States, and then one of his key campaign issues that he campaigned on was that U.S. should withdraw from the Iraq and Afghanistan, which he had by the 100th day, which he presented this press briefing. He has already started doing it. Also, before his election, the U.S. was under the greatest economic pressure since the 1930s, and it triggered one of the biggest government aid in history. And in total, and that year, 500,000 people would have died from H1N1 globally. So you can refer to this one over here. So another thing also, what's important about Obama's speech in this video is that besides addressing the H1N1 for the first time, it's also the 100th day in office, and in America, it's quite an important milestone politically, because this is at which point the president usually elects most of his officials to keep government positions that he wants them to be in, and so that they can enact his campaign promises, basically. And the reason why I chose this year and this pandemic with COVID-19 is because USA of 2009 is very much similar to Malaysia of 2020, whereby we are having great economic pressures. A recent political leader has been elected as the leader of the nation, and we are under a pandemic, of course. So that's why I think it's very interesting. So let's get into the methodology of which they presented the speech. Let me go back to the question so I can be more clear. Let's see. So we have to do a comparative analysis and find out the ethos and pathos in the message delivery and the employment of feed-forward and meta messages in the content. I also want to present some communication models that have been employed in this speech also of my own, that other than feed-forward and meta messaging. Okay. Okay. So let's look at one of the slides, the yellow slide, addressing the nations in times of crisis. I would say these two leaders is very good examples because they deploy a similar structure in their speeches. But then obviously my favorite would definitely still be Barack Obama, number one, because he was doing in English, and I think he is more charismatic than Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. That's my own personal preference, but never mind, we just get into it. So as we can see, in both leaders, when they are talking about ethos, and by definition, ethos calls upon the ethics of what we call the values of the speaker. So they are putting their personal values into their own speech. So we can see the structure here, right, is that each leader in the purple lines here, they would first acknowledge the problem, and then secondly, they would then give feed forward messaging. They give a practical solution to it. It's facts and figures of the things that their government would be enacting in response to this pandemic. So I'll just leave you to read it. I don't want to go too much of it. And then number two, we see them examples of them using pathos. Pathos also, because it's emotional, so it's also a lot of meta messaging going on, because as we can see that both leaders are newly minted. They want to prove themselves to the nation. So you can see the way how when they present their messaging, it's always very calm, very reserved. And also, other than these two, also I also want to point out Donald Trump, because we all know Donald Trump is this brash and this sometimes more nonsensical president. But then when we see, if you were to watch his press conference regarding the COVID-19, he's more reserved than usual also, because it's obviously a very serious issue, so they want to present themselves as being very strong and whatnot. Let me see. So in the meta messaging, besides talking about H1N1, the president also used the first 100 days in office as a way to affirm his campaign promises, and like before, presents the problem and then the solution, like the withdrawal of Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as the closure of Guantanamo Bay facility. And then with the meta messaging in Muhyiddin Yassin's term is that after only taking office earlier that month, he's eager to prove himself as a stabilizing figure, as he was not elected by the people directly, but he also wants to show himself as a steady hand. Therefore, you can get the sense that he's delivering the speech with calm and reservedness. But I would say in essence, the key things from both of their speeches is that number one, they take responsibility. They are also being transparent. They are not denying the fact that the pandemic has happened, and then big efforts needs to be put into to tackle it, unlike Donald Trump, who keeps saying like, oh, we don't need a test, or you should put disinfectant in your body. He's not really addressing the issue, which is not very good at all. And they are also at this point, very early on, they are controlling a narrative. The narrative is that the government is going to do what's best for you, unlike Donald Trump, which convinces hardly anyone that he's doing for the best interest of anyone. And they also speak with much empathy. Likewise, again, I don't think Donald Trump really have much empathy. And also so basically it shows that they are very well prepared individuals, unlike Donald Trump. Okay. Also, like when I was talking about empathy, also the point that I was saying is that they have the ability to contextualize the problem and how it affects everyone, therefore making people invested into the solution. Yeah. Okay. And also, besides meta messaging and feed forward, I also want to talk about some other communication models that they employed during their speech. Number one is the Buber's fundamental principle regarding the it and thou. And though, you means you, it means being interpersonal, and then it means not interpersonal at all. So in this press briefing, obviously the press is there. At the end of their speech, they will be asked questions, and therefore it will be a more interpersonal thing. But then when the main event of the speech itself is obviously their monologue, right? When they are monologuing, the first thing that people are going to see is that they are the face of the operation. Number two, that the person speaking is the official designated person, which is the president or the prime minister. And number three, they will see that yes, he or she is a politician. And only number four, they will finally, through the way how they speak, then only they will see them as a human being. So it's very important that people see them as human beings. So when the way how they deliver the speech, politicians actually have to flip the script. They have to make people first and foremost, rather than seeing as the face operation, they must show themselves as human being, number one. Number two, politicians, and number three as their leader, and number four finally being the face operation. So it has to be the other way around to be interpersonal, to be a DAO relationship. Number two is also the second communication model that we're going to talk about is the Shannon viewer model, whereby we discussed this in the group presentation about it. So in the model where you have the sender, encoder, channel, decoder, and receiver, I've already laid out who are each of the points, so you can see how it works. So yes, so thank you. That's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I will try my best to send this I will submit this presentation as soon as possible. Thank you.